This next demonstration, we will cover the miter or chop saw. Now, I have two of them in the shop. This one is a 12-inch, but it's also a slider. It's a little different than the other one, but I'll demonstrate both of them. So this one will slide in and out very easily. It's a well-built saw. It's brand new. Now, this machine is just meant to cross-cut. You never want to rip on this machine. Now, by cross-cutting, of course, I mean cutting across the grain. Ripping would be cutting this direction. The blade is not made to rip. You'll get a little ways before you'll get a kickback, but it's just a matter of time. But the blade will not rip. Last semester I had a student who decided to rip, and the piece kicked back so hard into this fence that it shattered the bottom part and bent the top. So this is replaced less than a week ago. So please remember, do not rip. You will get a kickback, it's just a matter of time. Cross-cutting, however, it does just fine. So this machine, I only wanted to show you the sliding feature of this. So you drop it down and you cut. But the question on the test is, do I cut down and pull while cutting, or do I bring it all the way to the end and push down and back while cutting? So this is for a wider piece like this. It won't cut in one single plunge, so you got to slide it one way or another. In this case, you always want to pull it towards you, plunge down with the blade running, and push back to cut, because the blade is wanting to push the board backwards. If I go down here and pull, the blade is wanting to run at me, and generally it'll try to jump at you a little bit. Now, like a lot of machines, there are safety rules with a few exceptions. But on the test, I just want you to know, down and push away from you. There, that is the test answer. Now, if I have a piece of wood that has a very rough edge, it's actually jagged, and it keeps it from sitting tight against the fence because it's got a bow or something, then I actually want to plunge down here and pull. And the reason is because it won't pinch the blade. If I go this direction, the board, if I grab another piece here, the board, if it's bowed like this, as I'm cutting up, the board will want to bend back. You can see the gap between the two will disappear. It gets thinner and thinner and thinner. Once I cut up to here, there's not much wood supporting it, and it will jolt back. Once that happens, it pinches the blade, and that is when you get a kickback. That's why that will happen. But that is more the rare exception than the rule. For the test, know that you bring it out, cut down and back. And if I have a good straight edge, that is the way that you will cut every single time. So now I want to go over to the other chop saw to show you some features on it. This chop saw is also a 12-inch blade, but it doesn't slide. It just simply goes down. It has a little bit of a wide, about an 8 or 9-inch wide board that it can cut. But remember, a chop saw only does 2 cuts. It doesn't rip, but it only cross cuts, and it does a miter. A miter cut is anything other than 0. I can see the gauge right here, and if I press down, I can move it to a different number of degrees. Most of our miter cuts, a miter cut is simply a cut that goes this direction at an angle, like a picture frame, are at 45 degrees. Most of the cuts at a miter cut will be 45. But really, anything other than 0 is considered a miter cut. So most of your cutting will be at 0 right here, and you won't need to touch it. Only a few things on your nightstands or other projects will require you to shift it. Now this one has a different feature. On top of the handle, there's a little button. If you turn it on right there, you can see a laser beam right here. And you can see the laser is on both sides of the blade, which is very handy when you're trying to cut at a specific length. Now, both of the saws have a stop, which we'll use in just a second, so that you can shift it down to your stop so you don't have to keep using the tape measure to do it. The stop is located just down at the end, and it looks like this. Now this particular stop has some lines, has a shield on it with a line to correspond with a tape measure on the side. If I want 1 foot, I simply line up that tiny little line with the 12-inch mark, tighten that down, and now when I cut, that is exactly 12 inches. It makes it really easy, so I don't have to keep taking my tape measure to draw a line and then line it up with a laser and so forth. So it just depends on what you're cutting. For now, all I want to do is show you in the squaring procedure. If we go through it, we went to the upcut saw to cut a rough length. So here's my board, it's 1 inch too long. Then I jointed an edge to get a good edge, the working edge. Then I trimmed off the other edge on the table saw. Now we're cutting it to length. So the 4 steps to square a board, 1 step, 2 steps, 3 and 4. But 3 and 4 are done on the same machine. So the mistakes that a lot of students make is, I want a 12-inch board. So they go to the upcut and cut a 13-inch board, which is correct. It's rough length. Now we're going to cut it to 12 inches long, but if I simply cut it to 12 or set that to 12 and put this here and cut, now this end is square and straight. This end is not, but now it's already too short. It's at 12 inches. If I cut any more, it's not 12 anymore. So here's the step. I need to trim off one end just to get it square. So I've got my laser set at about 1/8 of an inch, a blade width, turn it on and cut. And I end up with this tiny little bit or nothing. Now that is good, and I slide it down to my stop. Now I have 12, and now I'm cutting the other end, and I switch hands. I don't want my hand too close, and cut. So now there's my 12-inch board, and I just throw the rest away. Here's the trash can. But a lot of students will forget. They actually do 3 steps. They'll cut both edges, cut the end to an exact length, and now the other end I can't cut anymore. It'll be too short. So those are the 4 steps to square the board. Now the board is perfectly rectangular. These are all 90-degree angles. So without the laser, using the stop is very easy. You just need to be careful. Don't slam into it. I've now hit it twice, and I'm now at 12 1/8. So the more pieces you need to cut, the more you slam into it really hard, it shifts a little bit. Now, if you over-tighten this, you will strip the bolt that's inside holding it together. I have 2 of these, and one of them is stripped. I just need to get another bolt for it to go into. Be careful. Don't over-tighten it. Just snug it down and be gentle, and that's all you need to do. Then this won't get broken. Now, if you have pieces of wood that may be warped, kind of like on the table saw, it wobbles back and forth. Again, I would give you the same advice. Throw it away and get another one. Because the same thing could happen. If you cut a warped board, it will tilt. It'll rock while cutting. Number 1, you probably won't get a straight cut. But number 2, you could get a kickback. So be very careful about warped pieces. As you cut, the worst thing to do is to jam through it really fast. Let me demonstrate here. I'll just, like that. Now it's difficult to see, so I'll come a little closer to the camera. You can see that this is very chewed up, and pieces are falling off the end. Now, when I cut slow and evenly, same piece of wood. Well, let's do another piece of wood, but this time I'll go slow. Kind of let the machine do the work. You can see the difference. A huge difference between the two. Take your time while cutting. Let the machine do the work. You shouldn't have to press it through. And that's especially important on a piece that is really hard, like maple or oak. You don't want to jam it through. You'll probably jam the blade. Take your time and go through a little bit at a time. Now, when you're done with your cut, a lot of times the teeth will clip the very end of the board and kind of give you some tear out as you lift it back up. The easiest way to keep that from happening is cut, pull the board away, lift it back out. Now I understand completely that when you're here trapped between the two, I can't pull that away, of course. I get that. So in that case, just simply lift it up slowly or let the blade come to a stop. But if you can, your first trim, cut, pull the board away, lift back up. That'll prevent the tear out in the end that occurs all the time. The margin of safety for this machine, and pretty much all my machines, is 3 inches. I want to stay at least 3 inches away from the blade. So when the blade is down, I'm a good palm's width away, so if anything happens, my hand's not right there next to the blade. So the shortest board that I can cut on this safely is 4 inches long. That gives me 3 inches away from the blade and 1 inch to hold with my hand. So the shortest board that I can cut is about here, roughly 4 inches. That'll give me enough to hold as I cut and still stay safe. Now, if you do end up getting a kickback of any kind, of course the first thing to do is let go of the machine. It doesn't do any good to keep the machine running if you've got a kickback and things are flying all over the place. Let go of the blade, the engine, the motor, so it stops, then back out of the way. Kickbacks on this one generally will go towards the wall. Kickbacks on the other one will kind of hit the wall. There's a wall right behind it and it'll ricochet back. So you want to step back, get your hands away, so if anything happens here, you're not getting injured. I can fix the machine, but I have a hard time fixing people. So make sure that you are out of the way. If any smoke is happening, usually that's a sign that the blade is getting dull or you're just cutting so slow that a lot of friction is building up. If you end up with a burned end, which happens fairly often on a chop saw, let me know. Usually the blade just needs to be changed. Make sure that there's nothing in line with the blade. I mean, if I'm cutting here, I don't want a piece sitting here because I've already cut it and cut down. If I hit this, it'll slam back and give you a kickback. I had a student a long time ago that liked to cut with a tape measure right there. Needless to say, the blade was destroyed and so was the tape measure. So please be careful. A lot of pieces go flying in that instance. Now, if I have a couple of narrow boards and I'm going to cut them all the same length, like a face frame, which we do a lot, you can go ahead and stack them. I wouldn't do any more than 2 because this fence doesn't go any higher than this. But you can stack a few boards like that and trim an end. So I'll just trim it off. There, now that is flush. Now I can bring them down to my stop, wherever that is. Just make sure that they meet up nice and flat right there. And then I can go ahead and cut the other end, and they are exactly the same length. I wouldn't stack boards any wider than maybe 3 or 4 inches because you end up getting so much wood there and it takes so long to get through, it'll burn it, or the wood will kind of vibrate away from the blade and your cut's not square. It's not straight anymore. So anything bigger than that, I wouldn't stack anymore. Now this stop also works on the other side. So if you are right-handed and want it on this side, now I'm here and I'm cutting all my pieces here. If that's more comfortable, go ahead and do it. It'll work on both sides. It's calibrated for both. So you decide which one you would like. All right, so the chop saw, this one has the laser and probably is used most often. So there's the laser with a little thing on top. Make sure that you only cut wood. Be very careful not to hit a nail. Anything metallic. The carbide teeth on this and all my other blades they do not cut through metal. You'll chip the tooth. So make sure just to cut through wood and no more. If you go too fast, you'll get some tear out and it doesn't do a good job. Too slow, you might get a little bit of burning. But overall, the chop saw is a very safe machine as long as nothing is in line with it. So take care and get your setups correct and you'll end up with a nice, even, smooth cut that is square and even.